Videte ne quisquiat. See to it that nobody finds out. This motto is at the core of the last door, like a coffin worm that's made its home in a dead man's chest, or the faintest breath of decay on the petals of a springtime flower. Or I don't know, something else gross or creepy that I couldn't think of. But this request, to leave prying minds unsated, is an impossible one. For despite all warnings and misgivings, it's in our nature to look for secrets in dark places, to peer through doors best left closed, to let our curiosity lead us down paths that have spelled the doom for those that walk before us. For that, dear viewer, is the birthright of a gamer. The Last Door is a point-and-click horror adventure game set during the Victorian era. It embodies that sort of turn of the 20th century, gaslit-style horror that is increasingly popular in internet horror places and is immensely appealing to me, redolent of moody gothic fiction and pulpy weird tale stories. The Last Door is developed by Spanish game studio The Game Kitchen, and released periodically from 2012 until eventually being greenlit by Steam in late 2013 and released as The Last Door Collector's Edition, which I played for this video. The game was funded primarily through the crowdfunding site Kickstarter. Now, I don't remember the consensus on crowdfunded games in 2013, but now that term comes with plenty of baggage. The good news is that The Game Kitchen is absolutely a model on how tiny video game companies can use crowdfunding. They went on to use the same method to finance their 2019 Metroidvania game Blasphemous, which was a tremendous success, and in my own humble opinion, an incredibly good game. It's actually how I came across The Last Door. I was wrapping up a playthrough of Blasphemous and marveling at its grotesque and unique Catholicism body horror art direction and themes when I wondered if the weirdos behind it had made anything else. Needless to say, dear viewer, when I found out that the only other project they'd completed was a gothic adventure game, my interest was piqued. As you can probably tell already, The Last Door is a pixel art game. Now, this look was going through a huge renaissance in the early 2010s with games like Nidhogg, Undertale, and Papers, Please, using the retro graphical style, likely to save money and manpower, but also as a very much intentional nostalgic callback to the good old days when men were men and paint was still full of that sweet, delicious lead. The Last Door admittedly has a bit of a less sophisticated look to it, and I don't mean that in a bad way. There is generally less going on, things are chunkier, and the visuals are more abstract because of it. This leads me to the two things I like most and least about the game's visuals. To start with the positive, the backgrounds of the game can be absolutely gorgeous. So much mood and atmosphere is carried by these backgrounds, and the artists did a phenomenal job of crafting a sense of place with their limited canvas. I think the thing that really elevates these backgrounds, though, is the sense of light. We see sunlight and its reflections literally spilling across the landscape. Even before scary stuff starts happening, things like the shadows and sunsets create an atmosphere that is equal parts mundanely melancholic and subtly sinister. And when things do get weird, the backgrounds bring that subdued atmosphere into high gear. I'm a little bit less impressed with the character models. Now, here's the main character. Basically everyone else in the game looks exactly like him, but with different hair or different clothes maybe. Faceless, rigid, pixel guys. It's just kind of boring, and plus when something's happening to these characters, the weight of it is kind of lost because of how blank they are. I see so much thought and effort in the backgrounds and just not as much in the people that are filling it. And sometimes a great background is slightly dragged down because the figures in the portraits, many of which are significant for plot or theme reasons, are these same blank-faced models. Still, it's a minor complaint, and the backgrounds more than make up for it. As for sound, the music composed by Carlos Viola is genuinely amazing. No other way to put it. Like, I cannot overstate how much the music added to the ambiance and general experience of the game. The game has better, more powerful music than the vast majority of horror movies I've seen. Lots of dark, resonant piano and muted strings, all instruments that are contemporary with the Victorian setting. Everything feels like it's slowly building its way to some unknown crescendo, and there's such a tangible sense of mystery and anticipation behind every track. The theme music especially fills me with such a sense of some dark adventure that curiosity is driving me to uncover forbidden things and poke my nose into dark corners best left undisturbed. Also, there's just so much of it that the music almost never had the opportunity to become stale. Besides just the music, there was such an attention to sound design. Like, for example, occasionally when you discover a particularly disturbing clue, a few notes of sour piano chords will play. This song doesn't actually change, but by layering the discordant notes over the background music, your brain thinks that there's an actual palpable change in the music that your actions uncovered. It's a genius way to make it seem like there was way more effort and budget put into sound than there was. There's some great diegetic sound too, crows squawking, cicadas humming, echoing coughs in a sick room. They put a lot of attention into crafting the soundscape, and it paid off. As far as gameplay, I mean, it's a point and click. You point and sometimes you click. You're able to control your character's motion in terms of walking through rooms and up to characters to interact. You can inspect way more than you'd expect. Most of the details and basically all of the paintings are in a nice little bit of appropriately sinister flavor text. Ah yes, that gloomy statue of the Virgin Mary does make this place look even more mournful if that is possible. They should see if they can get one of those claw machines in here, maybe that would brighten the place up. Your inventory is never too jam-packed, and thankfully the game automatically discards items after you use them. I never was fumbling through my inventory for something, like I was struggling to put my credit card back in my wallet after paying at the drive-thru, because for some reason I feel that if I don't drive up as soon as the interaction is over, the car behind me will crash into me out of impatient rage, killing me dead.
Monster kill.
A lot of the puzzles are common sense too, not a whole lot of moon logic here. They're maybe a bit shallow as far as adventure games go, but I don't think that's the point at all. The point of the game is exploring an uncovering web of information, not figuring out how a differently brained person wanted you to use a shard of glass. Besides, as far as adventure games go, I'd much rather have something be too simple than too complex to the point where I get stuck and stop having fun. A core part of the game, like many adventure games, is getting stuck on something, moving on, and then finding an item that can solve it. What The Last Door does interestingly, and where a lot of the horror and tension come from, is you'll return to that original thing and something will be changed. Now the dead crow on the floor is a bloody mess. Now there's a faint thudding coming from inside that coffin that was empty a second ago. As for the actual fear factor, the game is pretty scary as far as point-and-click games can go. There are a few moments when I was playing late at night, home alone, and I would have to check over my shoulder every once in a while to make sure I was alone. Now, I'm not remotely brave when it comes to playing horror games. It's why Amnesia has been sitting in my Steam library for over 8 years, but each time I sit down and try to play it, I have to stop after the first 10 minutes. It's gotten to the point where I hardly even buy horror games anymore because I know I won't be able to play them. So although the game is definitely creepy, I do think that even moderate to light scaredy cats can play it as long as they leave lights on. A lot of the horror comes from atmosphere and building dread, worrying what's in the next room, what's behind the curtain, what the fuck is making that noise? The answer is usually nothing, or at least nothing popping out at you. But the whole point is that you were scared to click on something. There was a sense of the unknown that for a moment made you feel like you were in the situation, that you were in this pixel point-and-click world. There are a few occasional, mostly tasteful jump scares. Now, I am personally not a jump scare hater. I think they definitely have their purpose. A few overly choreographed ones did fall a bit flat, but the ones that worked beautifully in my opinion. And the game has plenty of restraint, which is key to making jump scares work. For every tense build-up that resulted in an alarming noise or visual, there were plenty that ended safely, which is an essential balance to hit for both jump scares and mounting dread to work in tandem. As for the plot, the story is appropriately gothic for the setting and tone. There are occult rituals, secret societies, murders, cover-ups, and a godlike creature from a world beyond our understanding. The story itself is built up little by little, and not everything is spoon-fed. There are plenty of small clues and places that are purposely left up for interpretation. If anything, the mystery of the game is less about figuring out puzzles to advance through the levels and more about trying to puzzle out the story itself. I'll keep this pretty bare bones, as I'll do an episode-by-episode recap later if you're interested. You mostly play as Jeremiah Devitt, a partially amnesia-ridden man trying to uncover a shadowy plot that he himself is a member of, stemming from a mysterious event in his schoolboy days. Essentially, Jeremiah and his friends thought it'd be cool to commune with powers beyond their understanding, and now, years later, their chickens are coming home to roost. It's a simple but effective concept that can be intricately built upon as information is withheld and revealed. You feel like Devitt is always one step behind whatever's happening, and I think he's the closest I've ever come to an unreliable narrator in a video game, if that makes sense. Now, I don't mean he's fudging details at all or misguiding the player purposefully. Rather, it's just that there's so much that he knows that he either can't or won't share with you. There are times when you almost want him to fire off some exposition to you about his role in all this, but the obfuscation here is definitely a good thing. Later in the game, you begin to wonder if you and Devitt are even on the same team. He definitely knows more than what he lets on, and it's only by the end of the game we get an idea of how much he may have been a willing participant in the background events. There's a lot of small, oddball stories that don't really connect with the main plot too, which I absolutely love. One could consider them red herrings, but I prefer to think of them as side quests, gnarled offshoot branches from the grim, shadowy tree that is The Last Door's driving plot. As for atmosphere, this is probably the single strongest point of the game for me. It's incredibly steeped in the world of gothic literature and weird fiction that inspired it. Not only do I love many of the books and stories that made this type of atmosphere a cultural phenomenon, but it also scratches that same weird, gas-like Victorian itch of games like Return of the Obra Dinn and Case of the Golden Idol. There are even times when the game's obsession with crows, creepy gaslit streets, and shadowy secret chambers puts me in mind of, and I can't believe I'm even saying this, but Bloodborne, a game which permanently rewired my brain and that I'm forced, as if by some supernatural entity, to replay every single year in October. Now, I know that The Last Door came out before all these games, and the link between them is tenuous at best. It is at most a vibe link, one of the most ephemeral but mysteriously powerful links of all. Anyways, the world of The Last Door was a delight to inhabit. I've been beating around the bush a lot about the literature that inspired The Last Door. I'm going to cite Wikipedia here, something my 8th grade social studies teacher told us would result in our immediate execution by firing squad by the plagiarism police. Wikipedia says that this game was inspired by Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft, but how true is this? Poe and Lovecraft are both guys whose work I've read extensively and who I would both consider writers who had incredible ideas that they just struggled to write down in a way that was clear or fun or easy to read for a modern audience. No shame at all if you're a fan of these two. As a high school freshman, I, like many others in the cast of young men that polite society is deemed unfuckable, acquired a copy of the complete works of H.P. Lovecraft, which always had beautiful covers with over 1,000 pages as thin as single-ply toilet paper and prints so tiny and jammed together that you need to be a mantis shrimp to be able to read it without getting a headache. I read it religiously and it affected my taste greatly from that point forward, namely by introducing me to a lot of writers of the same era that I liked a lot more than Lovecraft, like M.R. James, Algernon Blackwood, and Walter D. Lamar, as well as modern writers like Thomas Ligotti and Robert Aickman, all people you should really check out if you haven't. I sound like I'm being snotty, but genuinely I have an immense amount of gratitude for his work for being my introduction to this world. But as time goes on, I've developed a bit of a problem with Lovecraft, or at least his influence, and watch out because I'm heading into pure diatribe territory here. Now, obviously the guy was a complete nut as far as race and politics go, and I wouldn't blame anyone for being turned off his work for it, but I don't think there's anything wrong with reading and enjoying writers' work even if you'd hate them in real life, which goes double if they're already dead and triple if their work is in the public domain. Besides, you have to be a mild to massive weirdo if you were a horror writer back then. Nobody's faultless. Charlotte Perkins Gilman was racist, Edgar Allan Poe married a 13-year-old, and Guy de Maupassant was French. Instead, I bristle a bit when the word Lovecraft is thrown around to describe anything with tentacles or some unknowable horror, sort of how every game journalist used to compare any hard game to Dark Souls. Not only does this feel sort of lazy to just lump together all horror media where the plot is about an overly inquisitive character uncovering the existence of some horrible supernatural power, but it gives him way too much credit. Lovecraft was not at all the first writer to write stories like this, and even he wrote extensively about writers and stories that inspired him. Not to mention that other pulp writers like Robert E. Howard and Clark Ashton Smith were writing very similar stories at the same time and in the same magazines as him. I don't know, maybe a better term would be weird fiction inspired, but that's much less catchy sounding, though at least it doesn't give all the credit to just one guy. I don't know, I think I need to stop talking about this. I'm starting to feel a bit like a recluse driven to madness by undefinable forces myself. If you made it this far, you're appreciated. Anyways, all this is to say it might not be a bad idea to push back on attaching the Lovecraftian label to this game specifically. More on that later though. Anyways, from here I'm going to be talking about each episode and giving my stabs at unpacking the game's plot. Now, if you want to jump ship to avoid spoiling the game, I understand, but this time around I'd recommend sticking around at least for the first episode to get a feel of the game before you decide to play. The first episode won't have too many spoilers about the overarching plot, plus, come on, we're having fun, aren't we? Wait, you're already going home? But you just got here! Plus, be honest with yourself, are you really going to play the game and you're just watching this video so you can make an informed purchase, or are you just trying to use some juicy gamer content to distract yourself from the gaping void that lies in all of our hearts? Which is it? No, take your time, I'll wait. Episode 1 begins with a player character alone in a dingy attic, interspersed with regretful messages alluding to horrible things that have been done. Now, I'm pretty sure these are supposed to be era-appropriate Victorian mutton chops, but the pixel art makes it look like we're wearing a Bluetooth headset like we're working the drive-thru at McDonald's. Walking across the rickety floorboards, you grab a rope and set up a chair and tie the rope to the ceiling. At this point, the game forces you to hug yourself. You can see by my cursor I was trying to distract him with the cool stuff in the attic, but it was all in vain. We're given the name Anthony Beechworth, making it clear that what we just saw was Anthony commit unalive and that the text we saw was his note. And then boom, logo. We then get an incredibly stylish, cool little intro showing us crows congregating beneath a gray sky on drab buildings, trees, and gravestones. The music and the visuals work perfectly together here to set the tone and atmosphere of each episode. We're then taken to October 1891, which most of my viewers will remember as the month and year when Scottish golfer Hugh Kirkcaldy defeated his brother to win the 1891 Open Champion of Golf. We're introduced to Jeremiah Devitt, who will be our main protagonist throughout the story, and who we learn was the recipient of Anthony's suicide letter. In the letter, he wrote Videte ne quis sciat, which was the motto of the secret club that Anthony and Jeremiah formed when they were students at a boarding school. Now, I took 4 years of Latin in high school, so let me take a stab at translating this. Let's see. Just as I suspected. The phrase Videte ne quis sciat, which repeats throughout the game, means something like, see to it that no one knows. So, already we get the sense that some secrets are afoot. Devitt theorizes that something horrible must have happened, so without further delay, he books a ticket and travels to the Beechworth Manor. And can I just say I absolutely love this intro shot with the gate and bronze sky and the house eyeing us menacingly across the moor? Inside the house, no one seems to be home. Behind the house, a murder of crows are chowing down on some sumptuous gamer grub. In the main hall is a portrait of Anthony, apparently not looking too hot, as well as a note to Anthony from his servants telling him that they have no choice but to leave his service due to unbearable recent events. Already we have a great atmosphere. The old lonely mansion that's seemingly abandoned is a setting that is both cliche, but still incredibly engaging despite, or perhaps because of all the times we've seen it across media. We go upstairs, but it's too dark to go further. A note in the servants' room sheds light into Anthony's increasingly delusional, paranoid, and reclusive state. With the lamp we found, we can now traverse the hallway, and though one door is stuck and another is boarded up, we're able to access Anthony's bedroom. In the cellar, we find a crowbar and a phonograph record labeled the Carnival of Venice. Now, this is a real song by the 19th century violinist Niccolò Paganini, who, it's probably worth noting for our purposes that Paganini was one of many historical musicians who was associated with having sold his soul to the devil in exchange for his musical talent. Anyway, we pry open the boarded up room and find a room with a dead woman on the bed and "Leave me alone" written on the walls. Needless to say, things are getting pretty wacky. The floor is littered with unsent letters from Anthony's wife that discuss his increasing delusions and reclusiveness. In another, she says that she cannot go on and she cannot stand their stares for not being worthy of this family. When you inspect the body, Anthony's wife's, Anna's body, we see a letter saying her husband is now a stranger to her and that a foreign guest, not from this world, now dwells in their souls. Driven by despair and isolation, it seems she has also taken her life. Now, when you stop reading the letter, you get a jump scare that just worked beautifully on me. Like, maybe it doesn't work now, but going from reading that letter in silence to that little clattering noise put the dryness of my pants in extreme jeopardy. From her room, you can access another room, which is filled with creepy portraits of Anthony's ancestors. I think it's fair to say that one of Anna's notes describing mysterious stairs refers to these portraits, which, either out of growing madness or actual supernatural occurrences, Anna found unbearable and thus stowed away in this room. We then use the hairpin to access Anthony's office and find a note complaining that the house's cat somehow knows his secrets. We can go downstairs and put on the phonograph record we got, which, like, damn, the guy sold his soul to the devil for this? The record gets stuck though and keeps repeating on a loop. When we leave the room, the music stops and we find the entire murder of crows assembled in the living room, with the curtains mysteriously drawn. I mean, yeah, I didn't like it either, guys. Do you have something else you want me to put on? Maybe some blade or something? Now, we can go in the back and grab what the crows were chomping on, which is actually a dying crow, and that charmingly and terrifyingly continues to occasionally squawk in your inventory. Anyways, we put the poor crow in the pet bowl and prop open the window. When we leave, we hear a yowling cat echoing through the house and find that the crow is gone, though a trail of blood leads to a small hole in the wall. We follow the sounds down to the cellar and knock open a bricked up wall, revealing an eyeless cat that pounces on us. This whole story beat is a pretty obvious reference to the story by Edgar Allan Poe called The Black Cat, where the main character experiences a case of what specialists call banana brains and kills his wife and walls up her corpse in his home. However, when the police come, a supernatural cat, perhaps the ghost of his pet cat he earlier blinded and killed, howls and draws their attention to the bricked up wall, revealing his crime. One quick puzzle later, we can grab a gold key that unlocks the attic door. In an absolutely shocking twist, we find Anthony's dead body hanging from the rafters. We do the thing a friend in grief would normally do when finding their buddy's lifeless corpse and rifle through his pockets for some spare change or maybe a packet of juicy fruit. Inside, though, is a letter to us, apparently from Anthony's last shred of lucidity. He tells us that he's become a stranger to himself and the perpetrator of atrocious acts beyond his control, and that if we want to understand more, we have to return to our old boarding school where we met. He tells us that our lives, as well as the rest of our group's lives, are in danger, and mysteriously that they are already waiting for you. As soon as we finish the letter, the murder of crows bursts into the attic window and has some epic mealtime with his dead body. Episode 1 over. Clearly, Anthony felt that something was hunting him, and that the only way to escape it was death, but still nothing definitely supernatural we can't chalk up to him and his wife going crazy. And we're left with some questions. Was someone else in the house with us? How are we involved? Also, what could be behind that door upstairs we never got to open? With these questions in mind, it's time to plunge into Chapter 2. You can either jump ship now and play the game for yourself, or continue on this journey of secrets and horror with me. I'm glad you stayed. I knew you would. In episode 2's beginning, you take control of an old priest in a dingy room filled with crucifixes. You take off your shirt, intercut with the words of the Lord's Prayer before the game forces you to self-flagellate. This game really is a thing for starting off episodes with self-harm simulators. We are then dropped into a dark, dreamlike forest as questions about what we're seeing and experiencing pop up on screen. We encounter Anthony's hanging body and Anna holding a screaming baby, before they disappear with a sound effect that sounds suspiciously like the Vine explosion noise. The text on the screen counts down from 3 before we get a close-up shot of a creature's eye with a horrible howling noise. You wake up in the office of a psychologist, Dr. Wakefield, during a bout of hypnosis. You tell Wakefield about the eye and that within it you see deep darkness that awakens primal fear. Next we see Devitt at the grave of Anthony's wife, wondering about what led them to their horrible fates and revealing that he has some form of amnesia about his early years. We see a montage of Devitt's life reacting to the horrible scenes he's witnessed and traveling to the school, with another great establishing shot of the building. The school's grounds are completely dilapidated, with the fountain of the school's emblem, the angel Gabriel, neglected and disused. There's also a man digging graves behind the school. I love his animation where he puts down the shovel and wipes the sweat off his forehead before he talks to you. It's a cool touch and makes me feel so guilty for disturbing his work. He tells us his name is Baldwin, and that he was hired by someone called Monsignor to dig these graves, and that the building is no longer a school, but instead a nursing home for the sick and dying, ran by nuns. Inside, we learn from the head nun that Monsignor is the only one left from the school, where he was a teacher, though she forbids us from seeing him while acknowledging that many of the patients have been dying lately. We head into the hospital wing and meet the other patients. There's a guy whose sister is keeping him from corresponding with his girlfriend by not sending out his letters and not giving him the one she sends, which I can relate to this guy a lot, to be honest. I myself have a beloved that my family is blocking me from interacting with or supporting financially. There's also a woman who complains of a strange dream where she is encased in woods, and another patient screaming for help, though the nun at their bedside forbids us from interacting with them. In a disused classroom, we find notes from former students, including a long account of the mysterious mental deterioration of a teacher named Father Ernest. Interestingly, the note mentions our name, implying the note is from our own student days, before showing us a class photo that includes us, Anthony, and a student with his face scratched out. There's some puzzles to solve around the school. Essentially, all the tasks are to get the nuns to leave the school, so you can be alone to talk with the patients and the still unseen Monsignor. The atmosphere of the school and grounds is absolutely awesome here. You really feel the loneliness of the setting, the same oppressive loneliness that the students and later the patients surely felt during their time here. As you drive away the nuns, they seem to express guilt in their actions. One patient complains of his endless pain and asks you to put him out of his misery. I'm a bit of a gamer myself, so the chance to extinguish a living creature's life was instantly appealing to me. You remember seeing some morphine in the nun's room, so you rush out to get it, and when you come back there's no sign of the suicidal man, just a note that reads "Baldwin lies" over and over again. When you head outside, you hear a knocking sound coming from the hastily constructed coffin in the graveyard, but it's sealed shut. You find Baldwin at the front of the school and notice his tool bag. You ask him about the neighboring city of Aberdeen to distract him, and he excitedly tries to show you it on the horizon. This is the perfect opportunity to grab his tools, but it seems a little mean, like the guy was just excited to show you his hometown. Anyways, open the coffin and a half-dead body will fall out screaming about the darkness of the eye, mirroring your dream in Dr. Wakefield's office. The head nun arrives and tries to resuscitate the body, leaving you the perfect opportunity to drop in on the Monsignor. You get a quick flashback of being punished as a boy by Father Ernest. In the present day, the hallway is covered by creepy pictures of eyes and the words Eye of the Bird and Malum in se, which means evil in itself. The Monsignor, who, surprise, is both Father Ernest and the man we saw flagellating himself at the beginning of the episode, is praying before a statue of Jesus with his head covered with a black cloth. He seems to have completely lost the plot, and as we get closer, we realize he's blind from a seemingly self-inflicted burn on his face. In our old dorm room, we see another flashback of us talking to 3 other boys about our meeting of the secret club, which we suspect Father Ernest knows about. They switch the setting to a hidden lounge under the classroom. We find our old bunk, and for some reason our reaction to this is to curl up and go to sleep. Guess all this pointing and clicking is tiring us out. When you wake up, night has fallen and the school is transformed. Creepy organ music plays and red curtains have covered all the religious art on the walls. We're led on a breadcrumb trail through notes describing how a clever rabbit outsmarted a snake, vulture, and wolf that wanted to eat him. As we head to the classroom, we see shadowy figures standing in the windows watching us as we advance down the hallway, including this one, which is just so unsettling to me. All the other figures are partially concealing themselves, but this weirdo is pressed up against the window like it's taking everything in his power not to pounce on us. Eventually we find the last note and are surrounded by menacing rabbit figures. As we advance into the trapdoor, we're shown a strange silent film, An Impossible Love, which seems like it's implying that Baldwin is, Carl Tanzler pilled? Anyways, we wake up and head to the trapdoor in the waking world. When we get there, we find the room crowded with bloody corpses, clearly the previous patients of the nursing home. The same patient from earlier warns us about a screaming creature he saw, and we put him out of his misery with the morphine. In the inner sanctum of the crypt, another flashback occurs, showing us the meeting of the secret club. Shockingly, Father Ernest comes too. One of the boys, Anthony I think, tells us that we are going to explore beyond the veil, and that soon the door will be open and we shall see what lies beyond, before injecting us with a serum. In the present day, Father Ernest comes in and tells us that we are the 4th witness and refers to the painting on the wall as the Eye of the Bird. When we press him for more, he says that we damned ourselves by opening that which should not be opened. Beyond the veil, the Eye of the Bird saw us. Father Ernest has been attempting to return to the realm and using the patients at the nursing home as guinea pigs to figure out how to travel back, though each experiment has been a failure. He bemoans his horrible actions over the years and tells us the only thing left to do is surrender, before pulling a Gabriel Byrne in Hereditary. Suddenly Baldwin comes in and knocks us out. The game fades to black as we hear strange shuffling noises. It's only when we see the sad little graveyard behind the school that we realize where we are, namely 6 feet deep and still very much alive. Seeing the graveyard looking so peaceful, knowing what we now know, gives me such an icky, haunting feeling. Anyway, our story is filling in. Using mysterious serum, our secret group in some way penetrated a door into another world. While there, some presence called the Eye of the Bird by Ernest noticed us. During the intervening years, we lost our memory and the school shut down, with Father Ernest using the new nursing home that occupied the school to test experiments on how to return to the realm, using Baldwin and possibly the nuns as his agents. But why does he want to return? To defeat the Eye? To relive the experience of escaping reality? Is he perversely trying to seek the bird as the object of his religious mania? It seems that the Eye of the Bird has been haunting Ernest and Anthony in some way, but how? Also, it seems like maybe Father Ernest's experiments have had some limited success. More is becoming clear, but there are plenty of questions going to episode 3. Episode 3 opens with us waking up and breaking out of the coffin into some sort of crypt. For a second I was genuinely disappointed because I assumed the main character died and thought that it was such a ballsy decision to have your protagonist buried alive and killed halfway through the game, but whatever, I guess I'll allow it this time. Some flashbacks give more background on Devitt's character, that his father neglected him after his mother died and that he was originally ostracized by the boys at school before Anthony befriended him. Back in the crypt, the only thing in our inventory is a sinister-looking ticket stub for a play called The 4 Witnesses, the same phrase that Father Ernest used to describe the secret club. As we leave the crypt, we realize that we're in Old Nichols Street Rookery, an infamous London slum. We notice a man with red hair watching us, but he disappears in the crowd. Parched after our time in the coffin, we drink some water from a pipe, before allowing we pass out and wake up in a sinister dream world, which is what always happens when you drink the water in England. As we wander into the fog, we get a scene of Dr. Wakefield and Dr. Kaufman going to search for Devitt after his disappearance. In the streets, we meet a mysterious fortune teller and see the same red-haired man following us. When we ask the fortune teller about it, she says that everyone, asleep or awake, has seen that man at some time. Eventually, we find a crumbling house with a mausoleum in the back and the eerie sounds of a man laughing on the second floor. In one of the rooms, we meet a violinist who laments that he's lost his muse, a beautiful singer named Daphne, who is now buried in the mausoleum but that once used to stand by the window. There's also another room with a creepy old woman dressed in children's clothes who makes us play hide and seek with her, which ends as creepily as you'd expect. A cutscene and note we find reveal that the old woman was once a child dancing prodigy who, driven mad by her father's insistence she constantly practiced, eventually snaps and kills him. We grab a golden mask of a woman from her room, a red dress and a blonde wig. I'm trying not to get caught up in little details, but the way you get the wig is terrifying. In the bathroom, you hear the laughter that you've been hearing throughout the house behind a shower curtain. I knew as soon as I entered the room that you had to look behind the shower curtain, but I'm still traumatized by the bathtub scene in The Shining, so I did everything I possibly could to avoid opening it. When you finally do, there's a human-sized doll lying in the bath with the wig and a phonograph playing the laughter noises. Now you can turn off the phonograph, but if you press it again it starts playing sounds of crying, which is honestly worse. Thankfully, if you collected the hidden phonograph record that plays Family Guy Funny Moments number 62, Try Not to Laugh Impossible Edition, like I told you earlier, you can just load that up to make yourself feel better.
Here's to the ones that we got. Cheers to the wish you were here, but you're not.
Dress the mannequin up with the wig, mask, and dress, matching a painting on the wall of Daphne, and the violinist will give you a key to the mausoleum as well as his violin, telling you to place it upon Daphne's heart. He also tells you to look for the Simurgh. I'm guessing this will be a head scratcher for most people, but I already knew what a Simurgh was. A Simurgh, or Simorgh to use the Persian pronunciation, is a mythological bird from Iranian folklore, usually depicted as a giant bird of prey with the head of a dog. It's immortal and acts as a healer and messenger between heaven and earth, typically with a benevolent character. However, when we ask the violinist about the Simurgh, he tells us it's what both the crows and ourselves are looking for. Eerie. It's also worth noting that the Simurgh is a subject of a 12th century Persian Sufi poem called The Conference of the Birds in English. In the poem, a group comprised of every bird in the world go on a long journey to find the Simurgh, who they believe to be their king. At the end of the quest, the birds find the Simurgh and discover that he contains all of them, and that they likewise contain him. It's sort of a mystical revelation of transcendence and self-actualization. Now, wouldn't it be kind of cool for someone to take that story of the quest for the Simorgh, but make it sinister and have the final revelation of the bird contains all things, and all things contain the bird as one of horror and madness? Yeah, someone should really make that. Anyways, when we go into the mausoleum, we find Daphne's sarcophagus is broken open. We can walk through a hole in the mausoleum and get the nice little jump scare I showed you at the beginning of the video, where we see the eye of a gigantic crow that we can now assume is the Simorgh. We wander into the sewer where we hear ethereal voice singing and "Don't fall asleep" scrawled on the walls, as well as a note about hordes of ravenous rats menacing the writer, but we don't find any rats down here. There's also a gigantic tree with a crack in it. We're now able to access a new building which is revealed to be a bookstore. We meet a man inside who is oddly peaceful with just sitting in the dark and reading. When we ask him about the red-haired man, he said he's seen him come here and read the same book over and over. Further in the bookstore, we can inspect some of the titles on the shelves, which gives us the name of 5 real-world stories. More on these later. In the next room, we find the book that the man we met earlier mentioned, which tells us about a place called Jai-La, also called the Place of the Eternal Fog, a land covered in mist. Now, I haven't mentioned this yet, but in the level there's an area covered in thick mist where we try to follow the red-haired man through. We hear mysterious noises inside, like ocean waves and birds singing, but each time we try to travel through, we end up right where we left. We return to the giant tree, and placing the violin in the crack, it seals up, and we hear a noise, revealing that the singing noise coming from the tree had been the violinist's muse Daphne. The name Daphne itself suggests the character from Greek mythology Daphne, a naiad who has turned into a laurel tree to escape the amorous advances of the god Apollo. This also makes sense thematically, as Daphne's fate of being encased in wood mirrors the victims of Baldwin, who are buried alive in wooden coffins. Laying Daphne's spirit to rest allows us to access a note that gives us the clues we need to travel through the Land of the Mist, which is honestly a pretty clever puzzle based on the sounds we hear as we advance through it. Eventually, we reach a dilapidated theater with a red-haired man who's been eluding us standing in front. He asks for our tickets, so we give him the ticket for the 4 witnesses we woke up with. We make our way to the stage and encounter a man with blonde hair and golden robes. He identifies himself as Alexandre, a member of our group from our school days. He gives you some metaphysical mumbo-jumbo and tells you that the bird kept you alive in the grave and transported you here to meet with him. When we tell him we want to wake up from this nightmare, he tells us it's not a nightmare, but a performance, and it's time for us to look behind the curtain. And, well... Episode 3 was definitely the episode that's been the strongest in terms of horror so far, which makes sense given that it's in a sort of nightmare dream state. I like the break from reality and the creepy setting of the hushed, silent slum, but its larger size made it feel a bit unfocused in the super tight settings of the previous episodes. Anyways, we end up with a lot more information about the actions of the secret club and the consequences. The metaphors of the rising curtain perfectly illustrate that we were trying to peer beyond our world and get a glimpse into another realm. The introduction of the character Alexandre is important. We've seen him as the blonde student previously in the flashbacks. It's telling that, unlike Father Ernest and Anthony who are terrified of the bird, Alexandre seems to have happily penetrated the veil and seems to be residing there, treating the bird as almost a god worthy of worship. We see Devitt grabbing the mask at the end and wearing it. Does that mean he's convinced by Alexandre's argument? But what's with the dream world of the city streets? Is this all Devitt's hallucination, or is this an actual supernatural realm we visited? And what about the people we meet? Are they the ones who got close to piercing the veil but couldn't navigate the fog? Or maybe other patients of Father Ernest? Is the whole level a sort of limbo that tests travelers before they can cross to the other world? Episode 4 begins with Devitt in a dungeon with Alexandre. He says he's made up his mind and he's ready for the injection of the serum that will open the door for him. He clearly found Alexandre's argument convincing. They don the golden robes before the other masked cult members appear. We then see them standing together on a balcony and stargazing together. Alexandre tells us that all the elements of the physical or natural world are just silhouettes that hide the truth, the world that lies beyond the veil. It's implied that we are still in the hallucinatory dream world with Alexandre, and it's only when we cross the veil in the waking world we will get our memory back and meet the bird. We have to find the door and travel through it to meet Alexandre beyond the mist. I sort of like how we lose agency in Devitt's decision here. Like, obviously we know that what Alexandre is suggesting is bad, but it's too late. Devitt's already been won over. We're just along for the ride. Anyways, we now see Dr. Kaufman and Wakefield aboard a train. Kaufman reveals that Devitt was able to be saved from being buried alive in time, and that the whole secret of the nursing home and Father Ernest has been exposed. I think this also implies that the note about staying awake and the rats were Devitt's subconsciousness reaching us in the dream world, while his body lay in the coffin on the border of death. However, Devitt escaped and they're back on his trail, with Kaufman implying he now knows more about the conspiracy. Episode 4 begins with Devitt arriving at Alexandre's estate in the countryside, hiding among a dark forest and Roman ruins, which the house is built upon. The front door is unlocked and we hear footsteps inside. As we explore, we find a hastily dug grave in the backyard. Eventually we find Alexandre upstairs, but he's completely unresponsive and seems comatose. Notes that we find in the house reveal that Alexandre has found an alchemy grimoire that has the solution to returning to beyond the veil. Other notes suggest that he's become paranoid that the statues are watching and stalking him, and has had them moved to the greenhouse, while a servant's note reveals that he's been in the same stupor for days, alluding to some sort of accident. This level definitely has the most puzzles that we've seen thus far, and most of them are pretty smart and clever. The main one involves figuring out how to fix a broken bulb in the light room and develop a photo. While solving this, we see that the statues have been moved into the greenhouse, and I applaud the developers for not putting a jump scare here because wow, was I expecting one. It's interesting that the image of the angel repeats itself so much in the game, like here in the school fountain. An angel is part bird, part man, with man representing the physical world that Alexandre claims conceals the hidden true world, while the bird symbolizes forbidden knowledge and transcendence, the world beyond the veil of the Simorg. The angel has one foot in each world, in the same way that Alexandre and other cult members do. Anyways, there's a terrifying jump scare during the photo developing puzzle. The photo turns out to show Alexandre and Anthony along with a third person in the shadows. It could be us maybe, but there is the lingering mystery of who's the fourth witness, this boy with dark hair who isn't Anthony. The mystery is heightened by the ticket and class photo where one figure has their head scratched out or obscured. Anyways, when we show Alexandre the photo, he freaks out and starts saying the bird awaits over and over. After another puzzle, Alexandre enters some sort of seizure, screaming the names of the land of mists. We're able to access his secret lab in the cellar and grab a shovel. We dig up the grave in the backyard and find the corpse of a strange ape-like creature with a collar that says Old Mike. Another note to Alexandre tells us that they've finally cracked the code about the serum. Interestingly, he signs up with the same motto of our secret club. Could this be from the mysterious fourth member who kept on experimenting on returns to the veil like Alexandre? Anyways, I was just sad that the game had a lovable monkey sidekick named Mike and only found out once he was already dead and buried. We hear Alexandre scream, but when we run upstairs, he's missing, with the door to the balcony now open. The same balcony we saw ourselves standing with Alexandre in our vision, but this time with an angel statue. A servant's note reveals one night they saw Alexandre lying in bed asleep, but also walking around and stargazing on the balcony. Very creepy, and suggests that Alexandre's physical presence in the place beyond the veil could still be seen on Earth like a doppelganger. Anyways, we solve a few more puzzles and access the secret lab where Alexandre is waiting for us. But is this the Alexandre we saw in a stupor in his room, or the projection of him the servant saw on the balcony? We approach him, and he says we can cross the last door together. Oh, dude, he said it! He says he's waiting for us in the mist, and hears the wing beats of the bird. We make up our mind, and Alexandre, or his doppelganger, injects us with a serum. A short epilogue shows Wakefield and Kaufman showing up at Anthony's manor, still a couple steps behind us. They go inside and open up the room from episode 1 that we can never get open. Remember that? Inside, they find an unsent letter to Alexandre from Anthony that tells him that whatever we find when we open the door can use the same door to cross into our world. Now, this was such a genius way to end the game for me. Because okay, we found out literally what the last door of the game's title is. It's the door we use the serum to travel through, the secret realm of the Simorg, the last unexplored frontier, the last closed door of a world that tempts us to open it. At the same time though, it's the literal last door in Anthony's house we never got to open, and contains the most important message in the game, the idea that turns Alexandre's curiosity on its head, that piercing the veil is as much of an invitation for us to travel to the bird's world as it is for it to travel to ours. Before the game ends, we see Devitt wandering through the mists and presumably reaching the other side before the game ends and tells us the story will continue in the second game. Pretty big cliffhanger here with so much we still don't know. What did Father Ernest and the 4 students see when they crossed over the first time? Who is the 4th student? What does the bird want? Now, remember the stories I mentioned in episode 3? So I, of course, read each one and scoured them for as much possible overlap as I could possibly find, and thoroughly enjoyed each of them. Most I'd read before, but a few were new to me. Now, originally I had an analysis of each individual story here and how it related to the last door, but I cut it because 1, it genuinely added at least 10 minutes to this already long video, and 2, as fun as they were to read and write about, I don't think you're here to read a literature essay by me. I don't know, maybe you are, in which case I fucked up. Anyway, each of these stories has some minor to major influences on the game's plot and themes, but the strongest by far, and the only one we'll be diving deep into, is this one, The Great God Pan by Arthur Machen. The story is clearly an enormous inspiration to the game. Like, I wouldn't even call this game Lovecraftian as much as Machen-esque, Machenian, Machinacian. In fact, I think it's fair to say that Lovecraft himself got tons of ideas from this story, which read it for yourself if you're into this kind of thing, because it's a ripper, let me tell you. Anyways, in the story, an occultist doctor figures out how to do a brain surgery that will allow the patient to view all the mystical and divine world around them that is hidden by the material world, something people haven't been able to view for centuries. This sinister and magical esoteric world is symbolized by meeting the god Pan in this case, the Greek half-man, half-goat god of the wilderness and panic, who, to Victorian age occultists, also embodied the universe and everything and everyone in it, based on a misunderstanding of the name Pan as being the same root in words like pantheism or pan-nationalism, like the Simorg's role in the poem I mentioned. I don't know, man, read about Thelema, these Victorian occultists were really nuts. Anyways, as for the story, the language used to access this world is super similar to Last Door. Machen even calls the process piercing the veil or opening the door, just like the game's characters do. Like The Last Door, one can only see the world through a procedure, here a small surgery, in the game an injection. Also like The Last Door, that which is seen through the gate is unknowable and evil. After the surgery is conducted on a young woman, she becomes completely insane and it is revealed that she is, forcibly impregnated by the god Pan himself when she gains access to the other world, conceiving a strange half-divine daughter who wreaks havoc on the world. Which, I mean, there was that baby we saw Anthony's wife holding that was never mentioned again. Like the final revelation in The Last Door, the world of Pan isn't just something that can be traveled to freely, but that can creep into our world when the gate is closed. This is by far the closest parallel in fiction to the core plot of The Last Door, and it comes from Machen, rather than Poe or Lovecraft. My research led hugely down the Machen rabbit hole, and now I've read a lot by him. The similarities don't stop here. Like the third episode, there's lots of talk about esoteric mysticism as it relates to London streets and slums. There's also a connection between supernatural beings / other worlds and the ancient Romans. In The Great God Pan, it's implied that Roman colonists in England did the same procedure to release the god Pan through a marriage. Granted, a lot of Machen's work has more of that homespun folk horror feel, but he's not afraid to get into the cosmic arena too. So, what can Machen's work tell us about the ambiguities of The Last Door? Well, we can assume that the procedure that the four witnesses do is not the first time in human history that the veil has been accessed. Likewise, we know that whatever lies on the other side of the void represents, at least to our puny understanding, pure evil, and I think we can expect a lot of instances of that evil wreaking havoc on our world in the second season. But we still have so many questions, and yeah, how much of a cliffhanger the ending was is a bit annoying, but you know what it definitely made me want to do? Play the second season. Come back in a couple weeks and that's just what we'll be doing. Anyways, thanks for sticking around so long. I truly appreciate it. There are a couple extras, but this video is probably long enough as it is. Let's just talk about the next time, huh? In my mind, The Last Door was a huge success. Thanks to some clever jump scares and immense attention put into crafting tense, intriguing atmospheres, it ended up being truly scary, despite looking like a game your dad would have played while trying not to spill new Coke on his crop top. The background art is gorgeous, the sound is phenomenal, and the atmosphere grips you in its clutches the entire time you're playing it. The story also is incredible and enigmatic. Yeah, it's unclear at times, and there's plenty of cliffhangers, but at this point, that's what I want in a story. I've played enough games that are trying to be movies. I want to make my own story. I want to draw my own conclusions. I want to take what the developers give me and put it together my own way, like a raccoon hunched over a dumpster assembling the perfect meal from a discarded McDouble, shampoo, and toenail clippings. Anyways, come back soon for a video on the second season. Much will be answered, but much more will be questioned. I'm guessing at least. I don't know, I haven't played it yet. Maybe none of that happens. Maybe it's just like, I don't know, Cooking Mama 5 Bon Appetit. Anyways, thank you so much for staying this far. I was hoping I'd have a video sooner, but real life got in the way. In the meantime, I hope you had a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, a festive Lunar New Year, a Shabbat Yalda Mubarak, and a very lively Saturnalia. That's all for today. Thank you so much for your time, dear viewer. I wish you all the good fortune in the world. I remain your faithful snuggler.
Stars in the skies, like the stars.